Some love stories don't need a goodbye, just a look, and no one steps forward anymore. Today, let me take you into the story of Rachel and Logan, a woman who had forgotten how beautiful she once was, a man who wasn't her husband, but made her feel alive again. Not to justify, not to judge, just to remind you that some encounters are not meant for love, but to be remembered forever. Rachel Sanders, 42, is an art teacher at Jefferson High School in Dayton, Ohio. She has a slender figure, dark blonde hair often tied neatly at the nape of her neck, and deep eyes that seem to hold unspoken thoughts. Her students adore her for her gentleness and the raw emotion she brings into each lesson. But behind that soft smile is a woman slowly losing herself in the quiet stillness of marriage. Her husband, Dr. Mark Sanders, 47, is a neurosurgeon at the city's largest hospital. Dedicated to his work, serious in his words, he brings home more surgeries and night shifts than tender gestures. With each passing day, Mark becomes more distant, buried in a world of pressure, operations, and overnight calls. Rachel can't even remember the last time they had dinner together. They have 2 children. Ethan, 17, the captain of the school's football team, strong, ambitious, and expected to secure a full athletic scholarship. And Lily, 13, a girl who spends her afternoons drawing and nestling into her mother's arms whenever she feels sad. From the outside, the Sanders family is picture perfect. A successful doctor, a respected teacher, 2 well-behaved kids. But inside, Rachel feels like she's merely existing, unseen, unnoticed. Jefferson High School sits on the eastern edge of Dayton, where every autumn, maple leaves paint the campus red, and the whistle of practice echoes from the football field each afternoon. The school is known for both its arts and athletics, a place where students can analyze Shakespeare in literature class and score the winning touchdown on a Friday night. Rachel works in the second-floor art room, where the scent of watercolor and fresh sketch paper lingers. Her classroom window overlooks the football field, where Ethan and his teammates train under the soft autumn sunlight. And there, as an unspoken part of the scenery, is Coach Logan Price. Logan, 45, is the head coach of Jefferson High's football team. Once a wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns, his professional career ended when a knee injury tore his ACL. Tall, muscular, with short brown hair, tan skin, and a deep voice laced with a Midwest drawl, Logan carries the look of a man who has seen life, yet his eyes still hold the sharpness of his younger years. He lives alone in a small house near Shawnee Lake, divorced 3 years ago. His 10-year-old daughter, Mia, lives with her mother in Cincinnati and visits Jefferson on occasional weekends. Strict on the field but kind off it, Logan earns the respect of his students for his fairness. Parents trust him not just for coaching but for teaching their sons how to be good men. Rachel and Logan were never close. Their interactions were limited to polite nods in the parking lot or congratulatory remarks after a game. But that autumn, when Ethan suffered a minor injury and Rachel found herself at the field more often, their eyes began to linger a little longer. Their exchanges held a little more pause. And on a breezy afternoon, when Logan carefully wrapped a scarf around Rachel's shoulders as she shivered against the wind, something small, imperceptible began. It was late October. The wind from Shawnee Lake had turned crisp, and the football field was bathed in honey-colored light. Ethan had twisted his ankle during practice. Not serious, but enough to worry Rachel. She rushed to the school, hair slightly disheveled, her thin coat doing little against the chill seeping through the seams. As she entered the training area near the field, she saw Logan sitting beside Ethan, expertly wrapping his foot with steady hands. He looked both professional and gentle, like a father figure, something Rachel sometimes felt Mark lacked. She hesitated as he looked up at her. His deep brown eyes held a quiet warmth, something steady, something unspoken. "It's just a minor sprain," Logan said, his voice low but reassuring. "He'll be fine, just needs to take it easy for a few days." "Thank you," Rachel replied, surprised by the slight tremor in her own voice. She knelt beside her son before standing up to leave. But at some point, Her scarf had slipped from her shoulders. "Here," Logan said, picking it up and gently wrapping it around her neck with unexpected care. His fingers barely brushed the skin at the base of her throat, just for a second, but it was enough to send a shiver down her spine. She looked up and met his gaze. Not inappropriate, not crossing any lines, but undeniably human. "It's getting cold," Logan murmured, as if to explain the gesture, then smiled. But it wasn't the kind of smile meant to charm. It was soft, honest, and a little lonely. Rachel walked to her car, her heartbeat not fast, but uneven. She wasn't thinking anything wrong. It was just a scarf, just a polite gesture. Yet one question kept echoing in her mind. How long had it been since someone looked at her like a woman? 2 weeks after Ethan's injury, Jefferson High geared up for its biggest event of the season, homecoming week, a tradition of parades, performances, and the highly anticipated Friday night football game. More than just sports, it was a celebration of school spirit, where students across different disciplines came together to create decorations, design posters, and build parade floats. Rachel was assigned by the principal to lead the visual arts committee, responsible for decorating hallways and designing event posters. Logan, as always, led the football team in preparing for the big game. But unlike previous years, due to a shortage of staff, their two teams had to collaborate more closely, building an outdoor stage for the pre-game ceremony, where the football team would be introduced and outstanding students would be honored. And so, every afternoon after classes ended, long after most students had gone home, Rachel and Logan found themselves in meetings together. The first meeting took place in the library, where they sat across from each other, sketching out a stage plan on a large craft paper sheet. Rachel brought watercolor mock-ups painted by her students, while Logan brought the lineup plan for the parade. At first, the atmosphere remained polite, still maintaining a certain distance, until Rachel laughed upon seeing his clumsy sketches on the draft. "You draw like a third grader," she teased, her hand still shading the sky in the background. "And you," Logan chuckled, for the first time calling her you in an informal way. "You color like you're turning the schoolyard into an exhibition in New York." Rachel looked up. There was nothing romantic about the statement, but in Logan's eyes, there was genuine admiration. And for the first time in years, she felt her heart stir. Not from nervousness, but from the feeling of being seen, of being heard. Not as a wife, not as a mother, but as herself. In the afternoons that followed, they continued to sit together, sometimes in the library, sometimes at the outdoor stage. They talked about work, but gradually the conversation slipped away from posters and lighting setups to more personal things. About failures, about past regrets, about dreams abandoned in favor of family or buried under the weight of responsibility. And Rachel slowly realized that each meeting wasn't just a part of the job. It was a small piece of herself that she kept, amidst days spent giving to everyone else. Thursday afternoon. Only 3 days left until homecoming. The sky was a dull gray, and the wind rustled through the bare trees surrounding Jefferson High. Rachel was checking the backdrops when Logan approached, holding 2 paper coffee cups. "Strong espresso for an artist running on empty," he said, handing her a cup. "Your usual, right?" She laughed. "How did you know?" "You always drink this every morning before heading into the East Wing. I've seen you from the football stands." Rachel froze for a second, not because of what he said, but because it was so observant, and because her husband, Mark, hadn't known her coffee preference since their 2nd year of marriage. They sat on the steps near the bleachers, looking out at the empty schoolyard. The scent of damp grass, the whisper of the wind, and the rustling of dry leaves created a quiet soundtrack, just right for a conversation that didn't need to be forced. Rachel was the first to speak. "Did you always want to be a coach?" Logan nodded, his eyes still on the field. "Wanted to play in the NFL, but I didn't have the endurance after an accident in my senior year of college. So I chose to teach, to stay close to the game." "And do you regret it?" He turned to look at her. "No, I only regret the things I never said, like when my dad passed away, or when my wife packed her bags, and I never asked where she was going. Rachel was silent. What about you? Logan asked, his voice slow. Do you have any regrets? She pressed her lips together, then gave a small nod. I regret the days I was with someone, yet felt completely alone. Logan didn't press further, but his gaze told her he was listening, truly listening. Not to respond, not to judge, just to be there. A golden leaf drifted down beside them. Rachel smiled softly. I once dreamed of opening a gallery in Kansas City, but then Ethan came along, and then Mark, and everything went a different way. You seem like a great mother, Logan said. I try, but sometimes I'm not sure. When I get home, I have nothing left for myself. Just a pile of unwashed laundry and an unfinished dinner. Logan let out a quiet chuckle, not out of mockery, but in understanding. He said, slowly, not everyone needs someone to understand them. Sometimes, they just need someone willing to listen until the very end. Rachel looked up. Their eyes met, this time not by chance. Not in a hurry, just long enough for her heart to skip a beat. Friday morning, the last day before homecoming. Jefferson High buzzed with energy. Students laughed and chatted, the hallways bursting with patriotic colors and balloons. Everyone was busy preparing for the big night, except for the two people inside the old art room, making use of the final hours to finish the massive backdrop for the outdoor stage. Rachel stood on a wooden chair, carefully pressing the last letters onto the fabric. Logan steadied the chair, one hand holding it firm, the other absent-mindedly brushing the hem of her dress as he adjusted a corner of the fabric caught in the wind. She froze. Her heart skipped a beat. He looked up, and in that instant their eyes met. No more noise, no students, no deadlines. Just him and her, in a small space between the beats of a breath held too long. Rachel stepped down from the chair. Logan's hand remained on the wooden frame. As her feet touched the ground, the space between them was barely the width of a palm. His breath was warm against her cheek. Not rushed, not burning, just close. There's paint on your face, he murmured, his voice low. Then he raised his hand, reaching to wipe the smudge of pale violet, but stopped midway. He didn't touch her. His fingers hovered, just millimeters away from her skin, and that space, thin as a sigh, made Rachel feel it more than anything else. The invisible currents running down her spine. She didn't step back. He didn't move forward, but their eyes held onto each other. For a long time, a very long time, until the school bell rang, like a sharp blade cutting through the fragile tension between them. Rachel stepped back, reaching for a paintbrush. Logan let go of the chair. Neither of them spoke, but both knew something had begun from that almost touch. Saturday night, Jefferson High shimmered under warm golden lights, strands of bulbs draped across the football field, twinkling like a festival of stars. Students dressed in suits, evening gowns, gathering for photos, laughter, dancing. The echoes of 80s music filled the air, transporting the entire space back to an era of endless youth. Rachel stood near the stage, wearing a navy blue gown that hugged her slender frame just right. Her hair was tied back in a low ponytail, with a few soft curls framing her face. She wasn't the most striking person in the room, but to Logan, she was the only one he couldn't look away from. Logan wore a simple suit, yet there was something unmistakably athletic about him. Polished, approachable, and with a quiet melancholy in his eyes. As a slow ballad began to play, a soulful cover of In the Still of the Night, he stepped toward her. "Are you tired?" he asked, offering her a bottle of water. Rachel nodded slightly. "A little, but it's worth it." They both watched the students laughing and dancing. Logan lowered his head, speaking softly. "It's strange. Watching them makes me think of the first time I held someone's hand at prom. My palms were sweaty, and my heart felt like it was going to leap out of my chest." Rachel chuckled. "My first time was a disaster. He kept stepping on my feet." "And now?" Logan asked, extending a hand slowly. "Would you like to try again?" She hesitated for a moment, then placed her hand in his. It was just a simple, slow dance, amidst the noise and movement of the crowd, but the world around them seemed to blur. Only the music, the beating of their hearts, and the narrowing distance between them remained. Logan's hand rested gently on her waist. Rachel's hand rested lightly on his shoulder. Nothing was rushed, but their eyes seemed unwilling to part. And then, like a scene scripted by fate, it started to rain. A sudden, delicate drizzle. Not heavy, but fine as mist, enough to send the students shrieking and scattering toward shelter. Within moments, the field was nearly empty. Only dim lights, the sound of rain, and the two of them remained, neither in a hurry to leave. Rachel tilted her face upward, letting the raindrops touch her skin. Logan didn't look at the sky. He looked at her. Her hair darkened as it absorbed the water, a few droplets trailing down her neck and disappearing against her skin. Under the golden glow of the lights and the drizzle, her face held a quiet, aching beauty. Rachel! She turned to him, unsurprised. It was as if she had been waiting for him to say her name. "I shouldn't," Logan murmured, but his voice wavered. "But I can't not feel this." Rachel met his gaze and replied, softly but unmistakably, "I feel it too." A silence followed, long as a winter's night. Then Rachel took a small step back. "I should check on the students." Logan nodded, making no effort to stop her. He only watched as she walked away through the rain, her navy dress darkening with moisture, her wet hair cascading down her back, and for the first time in years, his heart felt something other than emptiness. After the rain, the homecoming event was temporarily suspended. Students were relocated to the gym, some parents had arrived for pickup, and the atmosphere buzzed with controlled chaos. Rachel was caught up in checking student lists, speaking with administrators, and maintaining a tired but reassuring smile. She needed somewhere quiet. The equipment room behind the football field, a storage space for training gear and treadmills, was a rarely visited corner of the school. Rachel stepped inside, hoping for a moment to collect herself. She didn't know Logan was already there. He stood with his back to her, towel in hand, drying his damp hair. At the sound of the door opening, he turned, and they both froze. I'm sorry, I didn't realize someone was here," Rachel said, her hand still on the doorknob. "It's fine. You can stay. It's just..." He glanced around. A bit cramped. The room was barely 10 square meters, thick with the scent of sweat, leather, and the damp air still lingering from the rain. Rachel took a step forward, reaching for a water bottle from the supply cabinet. Logan was standing nearby, too close for it to be accidental. As she bent down to open the cabinet, her hand brushed lightly against his. Neither of them pulled away. She straightened, turning toward him, and realized their faces were only inches apart. Beads of water still clung to his cheekbones. She could smell the faint scent of leather and his athletic shirt, something unfamiliar, yet oddly intoxicating. Logan looked into her eyes. She blinked, slowly, as if acknowledging something that could no longer be denied. Neither of them spoke. Only the sound of breathing, quicker than usual, heavier than usual, and the rain continued to fall against the fogged-up window. Logan lifted a hand, reaching for her cheek, this time without hesitation. His fingers rested against her cheekbone before trailing down to her jaw, slow, deliberate. Rachel closed her eyes for a second, not out of fear, but because her heart was pounding harder than it ever had before. She opened them and whispered, "Do you think this is wrong?" Logan answered, his voice just as quiet, "Yes, but I don't care anymore." Silence. And in that silence, everything became clear. After homecoming night, Rachel thought she would avoid him, or at least retreat to the safe distance of silence and boundaries. She was wrong. The next morning, she arrived at school earlier than usual, not to check emails, not to prepare lesson plans, but just to walk past the equipment room, where she knew Logan would be, getting things ready for the football team. She walked past. He happened to look up. They only exchanged glances, saying nothing, but they both knew. They had been waiting for this moment. Logan started stopping by the teacher's lounge more often, not for any particular reason, just so he could pass by Rachel's desk and ask, casually, "Does the English Lit teacher accept applications for an assistant coach?" Rachel chuckled, not looking up as she replied, "Only if you can analyze The Great Gatsby using a football play diagram." There was nothing inappropriate about these exchanges, but in their eyes, every word carried a heartbeat. They started sending each other small messages, nothing obvious. Just, "There's a meeting at 4, but I'll bring coffee if you need it. I just read an article about how coaches inspire players. Thought of you immediately. Is there a class that teaches how to stop thinking about someone?" Rachel left a sticky note on his desk, nestled between his playbook and a worn leather football. "I never thought someone could make silence feel like music." Logan kept that note in his wallet for 2 weeks. One late afternoon, as the hallways emptied, Rachel walked past the practice field. Logan was coaching the last few students, his deep voice carrying through the crisp October air. His gaze caught hers from across the fence, across a distance that felt impossible to close. And in that moment, Rachel realized this wasn't just a crush. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't a game between two lonely adults. She missed him, even though she saw him every day. And the worst part was, she didn't want to stop. That night, when she got home, her husband, Derek, was on the couch, eyes glued to the sports channel. He called out without looking away from the screen, "Did you eat? There's leftovers in the fridge." Rachel nodded, moving past him like a shadow. She went upstairs, stepped into the bathroom, turned on the hot water, and sank onto the cold tile floor. Her hands trembled as she opened Logan's message. "If I'm wrong for feeling this way, then I don't want to be right." She typed a reply, then erased it, typed another, deleted it again. But in the end, she only pressed heart react, because that was all she dared to admit. The school hosted Spirit Week, a celebration before the state championship game. The hallways buzzed with excitement, students and teachers clad in school colors, laughter echoing through every corridor. Rachel and Logan were assigned to help with parade props. Their task? Inventory the stage decorations in a storage room tucked behind the auditorium, a quiet, forgotten corner of the school. As they stepped inside, the door clicked shut behind them, sealing them in a dimly lit space filled with the scent of old fabric, wood, and glue, a strange mix that made the air feel still. Rachel turned to say something about the inventory list, but Logan was already looking at her, unblinking, unspeaking, just that gaze. The gaze of a man who had fought himself for too long. The gaze of someone who was done pretending. "Rachel." He said her name slowly, like calling her soul toward him. "I can't fake this anymore." Rachel opened her mouth to stop this, to find a way out, but her heart pounded so violently that it stole her words. Logan stepped forward just 2 steps, but that distance felt like years collapsing. He lifted her chin gently, and this time neither of them stepped back. The kiss started soft, then desperate, not rushed, but urgent, like they had waited a lifetime just for this moment. Rachel's back met the wooden wall behind her. Her hands found his shoulders, then gripped, holding on to the only thing that felt real right now. In that old, forgotten room, surrounded by dusty props and a flickering light, they found what it meant to feel alive, to be wanted, to be touched, to be seen, not as a role, not as a responsibility, not as a wife, not as a coach, just a man and a woman standing too close and not wanting to pull away. When the kiss ended, Rachel pressed her forehead against his shoulder, breathless, whispering, "What are we doing?" Logan's voice was hoarse when he replied, "What we've been trying to ignore all this time." She let out a small, sad laugh. "And if someone finds out?" Logan leaned back just enough to look into her eyes. His answer was steady. "Then I won't regret it, because for the first time in a long time, I feel alive." Rachel froze. Those 4 words struck like a blade. Not painful, but enough to leave her reeling. Because it was true, and because she, too, wanted to feel alive. A week after the parade, the team won the semifinals. The school organized a retreat for teachers and coaches at Lake Lanier, a serene lake in northern Georgia, where wooden cabins nestled among the pines, far from the noise of cars, surrounded only by the rustling of leaves. The afternoon rain came suddenly. A gentle drizzle covered the cabin roofs, creating a soft, rhythmic melody, like an instrumental lullaby. Most of the teachers gathered in the common room, laughing, drinking beer, and playing Uno. Rachel stood on the back porch, holding a glass of wine, staring out at the lake. Logan found her there, saying nothing, just standing beside her. The scent of rain, damp wood, and her hair blended together, striking a chord in him like the first note of a song that trembles the strings. "You still love the rain?" he asked. Rachel nodded. "Because it quiets everything, like the world pauses, just so I can breathe." She turned to look at him. Their eyes met. No more words were needed. They stepped into the cabin, where only the soft glow of a lamp with a lace-covered shade lit the room. The rain tapped steadily against the roof, and their breaths grew closer. Logan took her wine glass and set it down. His hand, warm and careful, brushed against her cheek, like he was afraid of breaking something fragile inside her. "Can I touch you?" he whispered. Rachel didn't answer, but the way her breath quickened was the most silent invitation. He kissed her, this time not just a hesitant touch, but the kiss of a man who had held back too much, for too long. His hand slipped to the back of her neck, fingers grazing her skin, making her shiver. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders, pulling him in, not to possess, but to make sure he didn't fall away from this moment. Their clothes slipped to the floor, piece by piece, softly, slowly, like shedding loneliness itself. Every touch awakened a part of them that had been dormant for too long. His hands traced her back, moving unhurriedly, as if memorizing every curve. They came together on the small bed, wrapped in an old quilt. Their breaths intertwined with the sound of the rain, the whisper of sheets shifting beneath them. Logan murmured her name through every movement, as if saying it aloud would make her truly his. Rachel didn't cry, but in her eyes was a beautiful kind of pain. Not guilt, but the realization this wasn't just a moment of passion. For the first time in 15 years of marriage, she felt desired as a woman. They lay together, her hand resting on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "What do you think will happen?" she asked, not expecting an answer. Logan tightened his hold on her. "I don't know. I only know tonight. I have no regrets." And in the dim glow of a cabin deep in the rainy woods, no one spoke of tomorrow. No one mentioned home. No wedding rings. No morality. There was only a man, a woman, and a night they would remember, even when they were no longer allowed to. The cabin was silent. Outside, the rain continued to fall, its steady rhythm tapping against the wooden roof like a countdown to a night that would never return. Inside, no words were spoken, only the sounds of two people surrendering to a forbidden moment, so raw it ached. The whisper of fabric slipping off skin, the quiet creak of the mattress beneath them, the deepening breaths, urgent and drawn out like a jazz melody, unstructured, but full of passion. Logan whispered her name, not as a call, but as a prayer. "Rachel." Her name left his lips, hoarse and reverent, like every syllable was imprinting itself onto her body. Rachel closed her eyes, accepting, no longer a wife, no longer a mother, just herself, a woman rediscovering what it meant to feel alive. She arched toward him, her hair spilling over his chest, each strand a burning touch against his skin. His hands slid down her back, pulling her closer, and when their lips met again, the collision of their restrained desires created a sound. Husky, breathless, desperate. Every breath from him, hot, unsteady, throbbed against her ear like a pounding drum. Every soft moan from her, fragile, trembling, was a string vibrating in the rising symphony of their emotions. The wind outside whistled through the cracks in the cabin walls, adding its own voice to the melody. The rain, now more than just weather, became the background score to a symphony where every prelude and crescendo pulsed through their bodies. And when they reached the peak, everything seemed to still in an endless pause. Only the sound of heartbeats, of their names gasped into each other's throats, and a single whispered, "Yes." Shaky, breaking apart. They lay there, fingers entwined, not speaking. But the silence between them was the loudest sound of all. The sound of two lives crossing a boundary they could never return from, of touching something fleeting, yet devastatingly beautiful. The next morning, birds chirped in the pines, sunlight filtered through the wooden window, and everything went back to reality. Only the echoes of last night remained, lingering somewhere beneath their skin. A song of their own, one that would never be repeated, never be shared, never be played again. Saturday night. Dayton was wrapped in the late autumn chill, the soft yellow glow of streetlights seeping through the living room window. Rachel sat alone in the armchair, a half-empty glass of red wine in her hand, eyes fixed on the news broadcast playing quietly on the TV. But her mind was utterly blank. Dr. Mark Sanders was on his usual night shift at the hospital. Lily was asleep, and Ethan had texted, asking to stay over at a friend's house after the big game against their rival school. The house was spacious, quiet. So quiet that even the smallest sounds echoed hauntingly. She unlocked her phone. A message from Logan remained unanswered. "I miss you. Just say the word, and I'll stop. Or I'll never stop again." Rachel stared at the words, her fingers trembling slightly. She had once believed she was strong enough to keep everything within boundaries. But the late-night conversations, the way Logan looked at her, the fleeting touch of his hand on her shoulder, all of it had eroded her self-control. She felt guilty not just for Mark, but for Ethan as well. Logan was her son's coach. If anyone found out, if even the faintest whisper of suspicion spread from the locker room or the school hallways, she could lose everything. But what terrified her most was herself. She feared how she anticipated a message from Logan more than her husband's return. She feared how her heart pounded at the sound of familiar sneakers approaching, rather than the turn of Mark's key in the front door. Rachel set down the wine glass, stood up, and walked toward the stairs. She paused outside Ethan's room. The door was slightly ajar. The room was still. His team jacket hung on the chair, his muddy cleats neatly placed outside the bathroom. If he ever knew! She couldn't even finish the thought. She continued up to her own bedroom, into the bathroom, and stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her, was she even herself anymore? A devoted wife? A loving mother? Or just someone slipping deeper into the abyss of forgotten desires? Tonight, she wouldn't reply to Logan, but she knew that didn't mean it was over, because longing didn't need a reply to make the heart ache. Friday afternoon. Dayton's sky was a dull gray, as if forewarning something ominous. The final bell had rung, and the hallways of Jefferson High School were gradually emptying. In the art room, Rachel was tidying up the easels when the door swung open. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Logan. He wore a gray team hoodie, the scent of freshly cut grass and faint sweat trailing behind him. But today, there was no half-smile, no teasing remark, only a tense silence. "We need to talk." Logan's voice was quiet, but he didn't wait for her to agree. Rachel nodded slightly, gesturing toward the corner of the room where two chairs sat by the window. They sat down, maintaining just enough distance to avoid accidental contact, yet close enough to hear each other's breathing. "You're pulling away," Logan began. "I get it, but I need to know, where does this go?" Rachel was silent, her gaze fixed on a half-finished student painting, a lighthouse standing alone in the dark sea. She felt just like it, still standing but its light growing dim. "Logan, I can't give you an answer right now. There's Mark, there's Ethan, there's Lily, and there's me, the woman who once swore she'd never do this." He leaned back, tilting his head toward the ceiling. "I don't want to be the person who comes between you and your family, but I also don't want to be the one you forget when you go back to your routine. I need to know, can you walk away from what makes you unhappy, to reach for what makes you feel alive?" That question, softly spoken, yet it tore something inside her. Rachel felt a lump rise in her throat. She thought of the nights Mark didn't come home, the dinners where he never asked about her classes. She thought of the last time they kissed. Not out of love, but habit. But on the other side of it all was her family. 2 children who did nothing wrong. And a world that was far harsher on women who dared to chase the rhythm of their own hearts in middle age. "I need more time," Rachel said, meeting Logan's gaze. "But if you need an answer now, I won't ask you to wait." Logan stood up, walking toward the door. He turned back, slowly. "Then I'll go. But if the day ever comes when you're ready, just text me. 1 word is enough." The door closed behind him soundlessly. Rachel remained seated, her fingers gripping the fabric of her dress, as if trying to hold onto something slipping away. Deep down, she knew a choice had begun to form, but that also meant a loss had begun to grow. That night, the house on Maple Street was unusually quiet. Rachel stood by the bedroom window, a cup of chamomile tea long gone cold in her hands. Outside, the streetlights cast a pale glow on the fallen leaves. A gentle wind stirred, carrying away fragments of her unrest. Mark still wasn't home. An emergency surgery, or just another excuse she had grown too tired to question. She didn't even bother texting him anymore. Upstairs, she could hear Lily's footsteps, followed by the faint sound of Ethan's music, his usual post-practice rock playlist. They were all here, and yet, none of them truly touched each other's souls. Rachel turned to her vanity, opening a small drawer. She pulled out a folded note, one that Logan had slipped into her hand during a faculty meeting. Just one handwritten sentence, the ink slightly unsteady. "If one day you forget who you are, let me remind you." She had hidden it away, but she couldn't bury the emotions within her. Every morning, as she brewed coffee for Mark, watching him move past her like a shadow, exhausted, clad in his wrinkled white coat, Rachel felt herself fading. And yet, she thought of Ethan, of Lily, a son preparing for college, needing stability, a daughter in her fragile years who had never seen her mother cry, never known that she once dreamed of living as an artist, rather than just an art teacher. The choices were clear, but why did it feel like, either way, she was losing herself? One night, Rachel dreamed of being with Logan at the shore of Indian Lake, the place where they had once coincidentally gone on a field trip with their students. He held her hand, his gaze silent, asking nothing, yet understanding everything. She could feel the wind, hear the water, and sense life in every inch of her skin. A dream, so real that she woke up in tears. She bolted upright from bed, walked into her study, and sat down at the desk. In front of her lay a blank sheet of paper. Rachel picked up a pen, not to write a divorce letter, not to write to Logan, but to write herself back, to the woman who once loved art, who once believed in love, who once believed that a single touch of the soul could change an entire life. But her hands trembled. Every letter became a wound torn between choice and surrender. She ripped the paper apart, and then she cried again, not for Logan, not for Mark, but for herself, the woman trapped in a perfect picture that was hollow inside. That night, Rachel didn't sleep. She lay there, listening to the ticking clock, as if time itself was whispering, "What will you choose? Duty or yourself?" The next morning, Rachel woke earlier than usual. She sat in front of the mirror, her eyes darkened from lack of sleep. Sunlight slanted through the curtains, tracing every line of her face. Beautiful, yet weary. She brushed her hair, dabbed on a hint of lipstick. An old habit, one that had seemed meaningless for years. But today, Rachel wanted to see the woman in the mirror, not Rachel Sanders, the teacher, not Mark Sanders' wife, not Ethan and Lily's mother, just herself. The woman who once painted through the night just to capture the hues of sunset outside her window. The woman who once believed that true love never made anyone feel lonely. She remembered the first time Mark confessed his love to her, at a small cafe near Ohio State University. He held her hand and said, "I can't promise to always be romantic, but I promise I'll always be there when you need me." Back then, she believed him. But now, when she needed a hug, a glance that truly saw her, Mark was never there. Not because he didn't love her anymore, but because he had forgotten that some things cannot be postponed by responsibility. With Logan, it was different. He never tried to be there, but he always appeared at the exact moments she felt weakest. Just a look, just silence. Yet in that silence, Rachel found herself. She remembered standing next to him in the art room, as Logan quietly observed her unfinished painting. He didn't say much. He only asked softly, "Do you still feel something when you paint?" She nodded, and realized that was a question Mark had never asked in 20 years. Rachel picked up her phone, her hands trembling as she scrolled to Logan Whitaker's name in her contacts. She didn't call. She didn't text. She just stared at that name, like staring at a door that didn't lead to mistakes, but to the truest version of herself that she had long abandoned. Then she heard Ethan's footsteps in the hallway. He knocked gently and asked, "Mom, I'm hungry. Can you make pancakes?" Rachel blinked and put her phone down. She answered, "Of course, honey. Go on downstairs." She followed her son, mixed the batter, cracked the eggs, flipped each pancake just like every other morning. But this time, as she tilted the pan, she was no longer just a mother moving on autopilot. She was a woman choosing her role in a life with no perfect script. Duty kept her here, but longing kept her alive. Both existed, both pulled at her, and there was no absolute right or wrong. On Saturday afternoon, an unexpected cold swept through Dayton. Rachel sat curled up on a bench outside the school, her thin coat barely shielding her from the chill running through her thoughts. The game was about to begin, and cheers rang out from the distance. She spotted Ethan, her son, wearing his number 7 jersey, shouting with his teammates. He turned, scanning the crowd for his mother. When he saw her, he raised a hand and waved, his bright smile cutting through the clouds in Rachel's heart. That boy was everything she had fought to hold on to. The reason she never packed her bags and left, no matter how many times she had wanted to. The reason she swallowed her tears every night she lay beside a husband who always turned his back. She thought of Lily too, her little girl who would crawl into bed whenever she had bad dreams. The girl who once whispered, "Mom, you're the safest place in the world." That sentence felt like a vow, one Rachel didn't dare break. That night, when Mark came home, he was exhausted after 12 hours in the OR. He set down his bag, looking at his wife as she set the dinner table. They didn't argue. There was no affection either, just a silence they had long grown used to. But tonight, Mark said, "Thank you for still being here." For the first time in a long while, Rachel felt a lump in her throat. She didn't reply, only ladled more soup into his bowl. And inside her, the turmoil swelled, sharper than ever. She loved her children. She had once loved Mark. And she knew, if she let Logan into her life, she wouldn't just be risking her reputation. She would be risking her son's eyes, her daughter's embrace, and everything that had once been sacred. But it was also because of those very people that she realized she needed to live honestly, to be loved as a woman, not just as a perfect wife and mother. Her love for her family hadn't disappeared. It only made every decision more painful, because when a heart is split in two, no matter which path one chooses, something will always be lost. The day Ethan won the regional championship, Jefferson High's field erupted in celebration. Rachel stood amidst the crowd, eyes locked on her son as his teammates lifted him in victory. Mark, rarely present, was taking photos of Ethan, his face glowing with pride. Lily clung to her mother's side, her tiny fingers gripping Rachel's hand out of habit. Logan stood not far away, by the fence of the bleachers. He wore a gray sports jacket, his eyes never leaving Rachel. And when their gazes met, just for a moment the world stood still. No one laughed, no one called out a name, just a slight nod, and a sad smile that never fully formed. Logan stepped back, slowly turning away. He didn't come closer. He didn't intrude on that family. He understood. Rachel turned back to Lily, then walked to the car with her family. In the rearview mirror, She saw Logan still standing there, like a memory that refused to fade, like a song that never got to play its final note. That night, when Mark placed a hand on her shoulder, Rachel didn't pull away. She didn't cry. She didn't sleep. She just lay there, listening to the ticking of the clock, like a countdown to something that no longer was. She didn't stay because of love. She stayed for something else. Something bigger than herself, bigger than the feelings that once made her heart race. And Logan, he chose to walk away in silence. Not because he stopped loving her, but because he knew that sometimes love meant letting go. 3 weeks after the final game, the first snow of the season fell softly over Main Street in Dayton. Rachel pulled up in front of a small cafe next to an old bookstore, the place where she and Logan had met once, outside the campus. She stepped inside, ordered a latte like always. Not because she needed coffee, but because she needed something familiar. Soft jazz played in the background. On the wall across from her, a handwritten wooden sign read, "Today's special, cinnamon memories and quiet farewells." Rachel sat at the same old table by the window. Her eyes drifted to the chair across from her. Empty. The same wooden chair, but now only breathing echoes of the past. She reached into her bag and pulled out a letter worn, its corners slightly creased, the handwriting strong and clear. "Rachel, I have thought of 100 reasons for you to leave, and 1,000 reasons to hold you back. But in the end, I only needed one look at you with your family to understand. If I truly love you, I have to let you be a mother, a wife, and yourself. I don't know if I will ever forget you, but I do know this one thing I will always carry with me. The way you looked at me that day, close enough to feel, far enough not to touch." Rachel never wrote back. She folded the letter carefully, tucking it into an empty sketchbook, then stood up. On the way home, she stopped at an intersection where Christmas lights had just been strung up. Their glow flickered against the windshield. Lily yawned softly in the back seat, and Ethan smiled at his phone. Probably a congratulatory text from his girlfriend. Mark called. "Where are you? Come home for dinner. I cooked." His voice was deep and tired, but there was something different about it. Rachel replied, "I'm on my way." And as she hung up, she caught her own reflection in the rearview mirror. For the first time in a long time, she smiled, just a little, not because she had forgotten Logan, but because she had finally found the courage to keep him in a place where no one could ever reach.